Hi Dr. Nicole.
Hello Sandra, كيفك؟
All good. احنا لايف. كيفك؟ ماشي الحال؟
Good, I'm okay. Thank you for asking.
So Dr. Nicole اليوم يعني أول شيء thank you for all the attendees اللي they are joining us. احنا we know كمان there's a bit of disruption in the region بهالوقت. A lot of earthquakes are happening. ورجع صار وحدة كمان هلأ من شوي. So يعني we appreciate people joining بهالظروف الصعبة كمان. ونحن we want to tell them إنه we are doing an anxiety support group. هلا منه specifically about the earthquake معك أنت in تقريبا جمعة أو شوي أكتر. Yes, بس we are going to be يعني إذا في أشخاص منا حابين يحكوا عن هالتجربة كمان نحن we are there to listen. and يعني we are understanding also that some people are going through maybe remembering other traumas because of the earthquakes كمان. يعني this has been something we are listening to people telling us about their experiences. وعم بيكون في كتير ناس عم تتذكر يمكن تروما قديمة، يمكن انفجار بيروت، يمكن اشياء هن عاشوها و the earthquake is triggering this again. So maybe كمان through our support group and a safe space we can talk about this kind of anxiety أكيد.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Sandra. كمان بس لزيد على اللي عم بتقوليه إنه again the circumstances are extremely devastating and unfortunate. يعني مثل ما سمعنا هلا الخبر. So that being said, firstly we understand that أول شيء مش كتير في عالم ممكن يحضروا هيدا السيشن today and that's fine. Things are going to be recorded so العالم تقدر تحضر ساعة اللي بدها. بس تاني شغلة وأهم شيء مثل ما قلت is that it can be really re-traumatizing for some individuals مع الوضع اللي هلا عم نعيشه بلبنان. يعني أكيد it's nothing comparable to what is happening يعني بسوريا وبتركيا. يعني بس عم نحكي عن كيف certain events or crises can bring back very, very uncomfortable feelings for people. And, I have seen an increased number of people كمان ساندرا هلأ عم بيطلبوا to seek therapy بهيدا الوقت. وكتير في أشخاص عم بيعانوا من الانكزايتي ومشاكل بالنوم لأنه هيدا الشيء اللي عم بيصير كتير عم بيودي لخوف زايد عند العالم. So نحن نتفهم هيدا الشيء ومنحب كمان نذكر الكل إنه نحن موجودين to talk about these things. You're not alone and support is available. So please take us up on that offer. عبر سيرة or other means. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicole, and thank you for the amazing work you are doing with us. You are moderating يعني the anxiety support group من هلا وبالرايح and all the topics اللي عم نفتحها معك هن topics خاصة أكتر بالindividual بالjourney تبعنا كأشخاص. So these are very important topics to develop نحن كمان يعني to self-develop and to overcome these challenges اللي بنقطع فيهم. واليوم موضوعنا ليلة يمكن very common خصوصي بهال age and time when we are becoming very individualistic society. عم نعيش أكتر وأكتر معزولين. عم نعيش أقل بكوميونيتي. يمكن صار يعني عيش الأفراد لحالهم وبعيد عن أصحابهم بعيد عن عيالهم كتير common بهالأيام. So a lot of us are feeling lonely even when we are surrounded. حابين الليلة نسمع منك شو الكوبينج ميكانيزمز، ليش عنا هالبيهيفير بهالأوقات هيدي، شو التشالنجز و is it healthy و how can we overcome it. عنا كتير ناس عم تسمع and يعني we are waiting for your guidance. So لكل الناس الجداد يلي معنا إذا بتحبي just to introduce yourself to us for the new joiners يلي على سيرة و then we can kick off with our discussion. Hoping to get questions from also the audience. So everybody who's listening in فيكم تسألوا أسئلتكم على ال Q&A anonymously if you don't want your name to show up in the recording, and we will be answering as soon as we get your questions.
Right. So welcome to everyone who's here with us today, and for the newcomers كمان أهلا وسهلا فيكم. So تخبركم شوي عن حالي. I'm a clinical psychologist based in the US. My collaboration with Sira is showing up here, providing, mental health awareness talks about different topics. للأشخاص اللي بيحبوا يعرفوا أكتر, what are the things نحن قدمناها من قبل. فيكم تفوتوا على الأب أو الويب سايت وتشوفوا الtopics. Everything's pre-recorded, so you'll find things on there. The great thing I say about Sira is that there's everything for everyone. في topics للparenting, في topics متخصصة أكتر للindividual support, في للcouples. you might find something there that interests you. have a look at that. وكمان ما تنسوا إنه في option تحكوا مع psychologist بأوقات معينة بتكون موجودة for asking, any questions you might have. And regarding, what I do, and I work with adolescents and adults, my areas of focus are anxiety, trauma, and more recently, grief. I've, taken up a certification in that because I had a, special interest in it. وكمان to add to what Sandra already mentioned, the anxiety support group رح يكون أول مرة نحن we facilitated. حيكون next Monday بعتقد 27th الشهر. The normal times that we usually get on Sira. So رح يكون ساعة 8:30 توقيت لبنان. Just for people that haven't signed up already, don't worry, there are going to be plenty more coming. هو لأنه حابين to keep these groups contained and comfortable in a safe space ونخلي الكل يشارك. So this is why حطينا limit على العدد الأشخاص اللي بيقدروا يعملوا sign up. So don't worry if you haven't managed to sign up for this upcoming one. رح يكون في plenty more. Well, again, it's really open to the public to bring any issues that they would like to discuss. So يمكن هلا مع الاشياء اللي عم بتصير يمكن تركيزنا يكون اكثر عن ال earthquake and trauma. يمكن يكون غير قصص. We'll just wait and see what people come with. كمان اذا بتحبوا تعرفوا اكثر عني, you can check out my website اللي هو meadowspath.com. وكمان اذا بتحبوا تبعتوا لي email, the best way to reach me would be info@meadowspath.com. and you should learn more about me on the website. or اذا بتحبوا كمان after the segment where we talk here رح نفوت على الأوض. So كمان للجداد اللي ما بيعرفوا في segment where we leave the Zoom call and we enter a private room where people can ask us questions, either turn on their camera or choose to leave it off, ask questions anonymously or not, مثل ما بتكون. بس هي opportunity نحكي شوي أكتر مع بعض. So without any more delays, I'll get right into it. حديثنا اليوم هو رح يكون عن loneliness. I'm just going to pull up my PowerPoint. So Sandra, please let me know إذا بيّن عندكم.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So loneliness. So I titled it, a silent suffering. Ooh, how do I remove the caption? عم بيبين عن caption. There we go.
Exactly.
Great. So yeah, I've titled today's talk really loneliness, a silent suffering, لأنه كتير أشخاص بيعانوا من إحساس بالوحدة أو feeling alone, and it's usually felt by ourselves. We feel like we're alone in our suffering. وما بنحكي عنها, so it's a silent suffering. I'm gonna just outline what we're going to be talking about today. رح يكون في شوي intro عن التوبيك, بعدين بدي أحكي عن شو الفرق بين isolation و loneliness و solitude, لأنه عادة نستخدم هول الكلمات interchangeably, but there is quite a difference between them. حنحكي عن كيف نحن منحس بالloneliness, كيف نختبرها, how we feel it, شو هن الأنواع من loneliness. Not that these are official, clusters or types, but these are just ways for us to make sense of it. So it just helps us to put them into categories, if you will. شو هن الأسباب اللي بيودوا للloneliness, شو consequences of chronic or long-term loneliness, وشو بنقدر نعمل. So I'm going to pause there. What does this remind us of? Stay connected and we're in this together. Does this remind people of anything? I think Sandra, أنت فيك تشوف الchat والengagement. أنا ما بيبين علي, بس let me know what people are saying, please.
Okay. I feel lonely a lot, but at the same time, when I'm surrounded by people, I wish I can be alone.
Okay. So في أشخاص already بلشوا يعبروا شوي أكتر عن their own experiences. We'll get to that. That's really important because I want to assure that person that they're not alone in feeling that way. A lot of people feel conflicted. بس بالنسبة للأشياء اللي أنا كاتبتها هون على السلايد, so stay connected, we're in this together. So actually هولي يعني at some point صاروا مثل mantra من كثرة ما سمعناهم أيام الكوفيد, بس it was at a peak and there was lockdown and things like that.
years. إيه في حدا قال COVID years.
Exactly. تنذكروا متى نعاد, hopefully. I think for a lot of us that was a difficult time. But yeah, so we would often hear from the World Health Organization and other organizations, and it's very important for us to stay connected and that we're in this together. وهيدا الشيء they were
theme song بيقولوا لي كمان.
Oh, is it كمان? Okay, I did not know that. Good to know. Yeah. So all of these things are really telling us how important it is for us to feel connected and to remain connected to one another. لأنه بالنهاية نحن social creatures. It's very important for us to find ways to stay connected. So back in COVID days, we would often hear, get on a phone call, get on Zoom, talk to your family, talk to friends. Again, all of those were things that we were told to do so that we could feel a sense of belongingness, a sense of community, a sense of connectedness. And again, this idea that we're in this together was trying to remind us إنه ما حدا لحاله ب their suffering. أكيد كل شخص experiences their suffering in their own way, but we can come together and help one another. So just as a reminder that those were quite dark days, difficult days for a lot of us, and that during that time, كمان a lot of us really felt loneliness in maybe a different way that we never experienced it before. So we're going to really just talk about what all that really means to us today. And again, if I haven't said this earlier, please feel free to ask questions at any point. I don't mind questions or, in between. So شو هو isolation? Isolation أو بالعربي يعني الانعزال is a lack of social connectedness, and it's a physical state اللي هي أمرار أكترية الوقت بتودي ل loneliness, sadness أو restlessness. So كيف بنعرف, or how is it characterized, the isolation? هي when we're staying at home a lot of the time, when we're refusing any interpersonal interaction, بس الواحد avoids social situations. People might find themselves كمان isolated as a side effect of a mental health condition. So for example, إذا في شخص عنده social anxiety, struggles with that, they might find it really difficult to be around other people. So as a consequence of that, they withdraw or isolate and spend most of their time alone. So في فرق بين isolation وبين loneliness, لأنه if we think of isolation as it's mentioned here, it's a physical state. It's the fact that we are removing ourselves physically from being in a setting where we connect with others. بينما loneliness it's an emotional state. It's something felt. وهيدا الشيء فينا نحسه حتى إذا نحن بجروب كبير من الأشخاص أو إذا نحن we are alone, isolated, right? So loneliness, as I just mentioned, defined as an emotional state, it's the feeling of being alone, regardless of the amount of social contact that we may have. It's often described as a feeling of emptiness. كمان another definition of it is إنه it's a state of distress or discomfort that we feel لما يكون في gap بالdesire إنه يكون عندنا social connection بس actual experience of it. So truly I might love to have more deep and meaningful connections, but I might not actually have that. So this gap can also create the feeling of loneliness. And solitude, just so that we're, talking about defining things appropriately. Solitude هو الوقت اللي نحن بنمضيه لحالنا. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. It can actually be a positive thing because some people choose to do this voluntarily. And during the time that they spend alone, they use their time wisely as a way to relax, to, restore their nervous system. They might do things to promote creativity. They might be doing some hobbies or activities. So بس لنميز كمان مرة إنه solitude مش بالضرورة يكون something of a negative experience. So just as a recap, نعرف إنه isolation can cause loneliness, although those two things don't always occur together. وكمان loneliness can be experienced مثل ما قلت within a crowd And being alone doesn't necessarily automatically means إنه الواحد عم بيحس بالloneliness. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts about what I've shared so far? Does anyone have any questions about this?
خلينا نشوف إذا عنا في شوية ديلي لا لأنه الإنترنت.
Okay.
Just give us a second.
عم بيكون في lag from my side كمان ساندرا؟
لا بس نحن لبين ما نحن اللايف تقدر الناس تسمعه يمكن في a couple of seconds.
Sure.
لا هلأ ما في أسئلة.
Okay, good. Right, so how is loneliness experienced? So بنعرف إنه loneliness ممكن يكون occasional بيجي وبيروح, it's transient, and it can also be chronic in nature. So for people that might have joined some of my previous talks, I think we talked about, stress, and we talked about how stress doesn't necessarily have to be quote unquote a bad thing. It's something that we all experience. It's universal. نفس الشيء loneliness. Loneliness is a universal feeling, something that we all experience from time to time. It becomes more problematic أكيد إذا هيدا الشيء بيتكرر a lot of the time and ما عم نلاقي solutions to deal with it. So that's something to hold in mind. The differences أكيد هي حسب الفrequency والduration والintensity. So this is really with regards to any emotion we can think of. It becomes problematic in nature حسب الفrequency والduration والintensity. And لكتير أشخاص مثل ما ذكرت بالأول, it's very difficult to talk about the feeling of loneliness. A lot of people feel ashamed that they experience loneliness because there's this idea that we're meant to be these extroverted social butterflies all the time. And of course, when we don't fit into that category, we might feel different or inadequate. So I've seen a lot of people, suffer in silence and judge themselves for experiencing loneliness and not really talking about it. كمان بدنا نذكر إنه no two people experience loneliness in exactly the same way. So Sandra, if you tell me you're feeling lonely, I can perhaps relate to it if I've felt lonely before, but truly أنا ما حأعرف 100% كيف experience تبعك is with loneliness. I need to ask you more questions, try to get a better understanding. I can empathize with you, but I can never truly be, experiencing things as you do.
دكتور قبل ما نقطع إذا كانت كرونيك ولا ما كانت كرونيك بالنسبة لإلك should be given importance، يعني لازم الواحد هالموضوع يحله أو يطلع عليه حتى لو ما كانت كرونيك.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that a little bit later, Sandra. عم تسبقيني بالtopics. So هو عادة we want to try to manage it before it becomes chronic. وكمان we want to understand شو هو هيدا الشعور تبع loneliness وكيف نحن بدنا نتعامل معه in general. So again, before it becomes chronic في أشياء فينا نعملها، بس كإلي كمعالجة نفسية my approach حيكون مختلف على حسب ال intensity و duration و frequency that I hear a person telling me that they're struggling with loneliness. So هول الكلمات اللي بنشوفهم على السلايد هلا they are just some ways that we hear people talk about loneliness. They relate it to feelings of sadness and fear, distress. It's described often as a painful feeling. For some people, they will use the word feeling abandoned, lost. I've even heard the word rejected in relation to loneliness, not being understood by others, not being seen. We feel the sense of powerlessness, helplessness, as though there's this just darkness of a cloud, just following us. So that's just a few ways that we can describe loneliness. Sandra, أنت لإلك, what words come to mind when you experience loneliness?
Abandoned.
Yeah.
So it resonates.
Yeah. Feeling like you're, alienated or singled out from everyone. ما حدا عم بيتفهم what you're going through. When I try to describe it, I kind of talk about how it feels in my body a lot of the time. So I feel kind of this emptiness or sometimes a heaviness on my chest. That's how I experience loneliness in the body. And I often feel also misunderstood or unseen as well if those feelings come up.
There's a lot of shame to say you feel lonely ولا إنه you're going through something like this. واحد مش بسهولة بيجي بيقول، خصوصي إذا بتقولي قدام أصحاب بحسوا حالهم إنه كأنه هن يعني they're not there for you. بتصير about them. ببطلوا
Yes.
about you. بيصير إنه أنا شو عملت ما أنا هون، وتصير عن الشخص التاني أنت بدك تراضي بعدين.
100%. I so appreciate you bringing that up because that's another reason that prevents people from talking about their loneliness. بتكون أوقات ردات فعل الأشخاص اللي حوالينا it makes us second guess ourselves. No, why did I tell them to begin with? Now the tables have turned. It's become all about them. And, of course, people that are in our lives probably mean well and have the best of intentions, but they don't realize that sometimes this makes us feel more isolated when we're trying to express our true feelings. Not only that, but as I mentioned earlier, كمان هي فكرة إنه من المفروض نحن ما نحس بهيدا الشعور، أو إذا إجا it's not that big of a deal. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stigma and shame. Right. So types of loneliness. Some people might feel loneliness due to a lack of a physical connection. So because they feel physically isolated, so مثل أيام again, COVID days, we were meant to stay at home. There was lockdown. So this meant that we were separated from our loved ones. أكيد حسب كل واحد والcircumstances تبعوله. But for a lot of people, this was very difficult. Even if we weren't physically isolated, we felt that way because we could no longer touch them or hug them or be with them in the way that we used to. So هال sense of familiarity مثل اختفت. كمان ممكن يسبب loneliness. Another common type is بس يكون في lack of common interest. So if we're going out with a bunch of people and they're talking about certain topics that نحن we could care less about, هيدا الشيء can actually create a sense of loneliness لإلنا. We might start thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I hanging out with this bunch? ليه عم بيحكوا بالX وأنا بالي بالY? Whatever it might be. So the lack of common interests is a reason. Another is a lack of shared values. If you don't have at least a couple of people in your life who have similar values to you, كمان طبيعي إنه for us to end up feeling lonely. Another type of loneliness is the lack of emotional intimacy. لما نحن ما بنحس إنه عنا هال connection to the people in our lives at a genuine level. We can have so many people in our lives, but it's not just about the quantity. Quality matters too. So as a whole, types of connections ما كانوا at a deep, meaningful connection, then we're also going to feel quite alone. And this might be, a surprising one for some of our audience here, but a lack of self-intimacy, which means not having a good relationship with ourselves, كمان ممكن يخلينا نحس بالloneliness. كتير في أشخاص, they don't know how to make use of their alone time or their solitude. And this can create more anxiety, more feelings of loneliness. So part of intervention strategies that we'll talk about later is how to build a better connection with ourselves. One of the things, I hear quite often is I have friends and family. I have a lot of people in my life that love me, but I still feel lonely and I don't understand why. And as we're learning today, it's tied to the quality of the relationships. مش بس العدد. نوعية هالعلاقة كتير مهمة. And sometimes a lack of authenticity, as we mentioned, can result in the feeling of loneliness. So I want to hear from people before I start, going on and blabbing on about this section. But what causes loneliness? برأيكم?
We are waiting for comments.
Sure. There's no, wrong answer here. I'm just curious to know your thoughts على الموضوع. For those of you who have felt lonely before, which I'm sure is the case for everyone here, we all experience it. What caused your loneliness?
Conditional love, not being included in plans.
Yeah, not being included in plans is a common and popular one. Yeah, بس يكون في شي طلعة and then you find out about it later, that hurts. Why wasn't I included? You feel lonely with that. Yeah.
Conditional love.
Conditional love, feeling that you're only receiving love and care and affection only if, and we fill in the blank. Yeah. في شروط لهيدا الحب اللي نحن we're receiving. So common causes, to add to what people have already shared with us, could be, as I mentioned earlier, social anxiety. For someone that struggles with social anxiety, it can be really hard to make and maintain social connections and relationships when we feel really anxious around people all the time. So again, the person may intentionally want to make deeper connections, but just doesn't know how because they're just terrified. They're terrified and they're anxious. So that can be a cause. Secondly, trauma. When a frightening, painful, or disturbing event happens, it leads to what we call a trauma response or a fear or anxiety response. هيدا الشيء كمان ممكن يمنع الأشخاص from having, deeper connections with others. Again, the brain does things to protect us. So this is not to say that there's any fault or blame being assigned to anyone, but as a result of a traumatic experience, the brain might learn to avoid certain situations. Those types of situations might mean avoiding certain people or places, etc. Low self-esteem, إذا نحن بنفكر negatively عن حالنا, then it will easily generalize to imagining that other people think of us in the same way. Lack of assertiveness. So assertiveness هي one of the communication styles. هي الطريقة اللي نحن منعبر عن حالنا. So إذا الشخص ما عنده طريقة to be honest and clear and straightforward about what it is that they want and they don't want, they might also struggle with their social relationships in some way and again feel lonely. Poor self-awareness. This can lead to feeling lonely when we're not connected to ourselves in a genuine way. So as I mentioned, how we spend our time alone, العلاقة اللي نحن عنا إياها مع حالنا, كيف بنحكي مع حالنا, those are the foundations to how we then relate to the people in our lives. شو ممكن يصير إذا نحن ما عملنا any intervention لهالمشاعر وصار عنا chronic loneliness? Well, firstly, we might have unhealthy relationships. We might feel like we are stuck in our relationships. We don't know where to go. For some people, that even means being in abusive relationships. They might struggle with the idea of being alone. So they might think, okay, خليني أنا أكون بهالعلاقة. It's better than being alone. So there can be that situation. For some people, it might lead to problems with substances or substance abuse. So to numb those feelings, to make those uncomfortable feelings go away, people resort to substances. أكيد, it's related to mental health difficulties. So chronic loneliness could be an indication, of course, of depression, anxiety, and could even lead to death by suicide. And for some people who experience loneliness, they want to get rid of this feeling. So they become chronic busy people. They're always trying to keep themselves busy. They can't sit still because they're trying to avoid هيدا الشعور of loneliness. كمان if we're talking physical health, أكيد في effects, في consequences اللي هن بيكون في increased cardiovascular risk, such as high blood pressure, problems with their cholesterol levels, high levels of other things, and obesity. فهول كل الاشياء اللي ممكن تكون consequence إذا نحن we did not manage the loneliness. What we can do. So I'm gonna put this up because this is the really important slide. First and foremost, not that this is in any particular order, but أول شغلة كتير مهمة هو for us to acknowledge our feelings, meaning to admit to ourselves that we are feeling this feeling. If we try to push it away, we try to ignore it, guess what? It's going to come back super strong. It's going to feel very intense and unmanageable. So أول شغلة كتير أساسية هو to acknowledge our feelings. تاني شغلة is it's very important كمان to strengthen existing relationships by being intentionally vulnerable. So being intentionally vulnerable هو لما الشخص ياخد conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm going to start opening up. I'm going to be raw. I'm going to share some things that I'm not so proud about, that doesn't feel very comfortable for me to do, but I'm going to do it anyways. So taking those risks كمان كتير بيساعدوا إنه نخلق هالdeep connections. للأشخاص اللي ممكن يعانوا من social anxiety, there are many ways for us to go about it to enhance the social skills. عادة هون working with a mental health professional really helps because they can teach you the techniques of how to work on combating this anxiety and fear so that it doesn't prevent you from going to social settings and outings. كمان مثل ما ذكرنا, loneliness can be an indication of something, of a mental health issue that's pre-existing. So هيدا الشيء بيعني إنه we have to address the pre-existing mental health issues شو ما كانوا يكونوا. Some of those things might include maladaptive cognitions. Maladaptive cognitions هن بيعنوا our unhelpful way of thinking. So if I think to myself, people don't love me, people think I'm a loser, having those thoughts أكيد حيخليني أنا كمان to want to avoid being around others. So working on understanding, well, where do those thoughts come from? There might be a history of trauma going on that might explain what's happening. Again, working with a mental health professional would really, really be helpful in this situation. Knowing when it's time to log off from social media, the verdict is out. Spending an excessive amount of time on social media can negatively affect our mental health. So هون الواحد لازم يكون كمان very mindful about how much time they're spending on social media, what they're actually doing on social media. Do they find themselves looking at other people's photos going, yee, what a beautiful life, but look at my life, it's this and that, and I wish it was that. If there's this, constant comparison, and feeling bad about yourself, then maybe it's time to set limits to your relationship with social media. Increasing opportunities for social interactions such as through volunteering كمان ممكن يكون شيء بيساعد. لما نحن نلاقي purpose, لما نحن نلاقي a bigger cause beyond ourselves, it is related to us improving our self-esteem, feeling good, feeling like we have a sense of purpose and meaning and belongingness. So I often tell people to find a cause that they're, passionate about, whether that's volunteering for an animal shelter or going to a nursing home. There are so many things that we can do that creates a sense of community, belongingness, and makes us feel good about ourselves because it's in align with our values and what matters to us the most. أهم شغلة هون كمان is about getting to know ourselves. It's very important that we understand what's the relationship I have with myself. Do I have a compassionate, kind, understanding relationship with myself, or am I at a loss? How do I spend my time when I'm alone? Do I find myself criticizing myself? Well, am I using my time meaningfully? هيدا الشيء كمان can either make the feeling of loneliness more or less. I wanted to put a book up here for people just to, if they're interested in picking up a book and learning more. The book I recommend here is by Brene Brown. It's called Braving the Wilderness. Brene Brown is an excellent, researcher in the field of psychology. Her area focuses عادة on shame, authenticity, courage. Those are sort of the themes she focuses on a lot. Vulnerability. فهيدا الكتاب بيحكي عن شعور loneliness and shame and it's very relatable, I find.
أنا comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
So أنا comment إنه في حدا من الأودينس عم بيقول always I feel that I'm not the first priority, especially with friends. I don't know if you want to comment on this. بعدين عنا أسئلة وعنا كمان إنه last one to be remembered. This is also one of the causes of feeling lonely. وعنا سؤالين. So do you want to comment قبل على whole and then we take the questions?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on those things, the two things that you just shared, but perhaps I would invite those two people, if they would like to talk more or ask any questions, to join us in the room, in the private space afterwards. But I'll take the questions right now, Sandra.
Okay, so أول سؤال, how is chronic loneliness defined?
Great question. So chronic loneliness is defined by three things: the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of it. إذا أنا كل يوم عم بحس بالشعور of loneliness, it doesn't come and go, but I wake up every single day and I feel it, that could be an indication that it's chronic, right? It's long term. تاني شغلة بدنا نعرف كيف عم بتأثر على حياة الشخص. إذا loneliness عم بتخلي الشخص to withdraw, to isolate, to have some negative or pessimistic thinking about people or the world or about themselves. كمان هيدي it indicates إنه يمكن صرنا بمرحلة chronic. So anything that doesn't sort of come and go بس عم نعيشه بشكل يومي وعم بيأثر على حياتنا اليومية is what we would call chronic. So again, think of something like stress. كلنا بنحس بالسترess every now and then. إذا أنا عندي deadline to submit a project for work, أكيد هيدا الشيء حيسبب لي نوع من السترess، بس هيدا السترess يمكن ما يكون debilitating. يمكن بيجي for 2 days, it might be something that keeps me on edge, but afterwards I feel relaxed. إذا هيك loneliness إجت وراحت, it's normal, we all experience it. بينما like I said, إذا بشكل يومي وعم بتأثر على حياتنا in other areas, then yeah, it's become another level.
Okay, it's clear. عنا بعد سؤال. Dr. Nicole, do you think there is a relationship between loneliness and eating disorders appearing? For example, bulimia?
Yeah, absolutely. I just gave the example of perhaps, 3 common mental health conditions I mentioned earlier: depression, anxiety. But absolutely, we know that loneliness is associated with pretty much any mental health condition. If we don't address these things, we're at more risk of having a mental health condition. كمان شو هو mental health condition بيختلف عن شخص لشخص. But for a lot of people, yes, it can lead to a difficulty if not addressed.
All right, those are the questions for now.
Great. So that's my part, in terms of like the lecture for today. I think, Sandra, we could move on to the rooms if we have some people get started with that, and we can talk more about this topic today, or if anyone has any other things they want to bring up, I'm happy to address that.
أكيد نحن before we I'm gonna show how do we move to the room. بس قبل إذا بتحبي هيك just a parting remark لننهي recording، وهيك إذا في ناس عم تسمعنا كمان where do we start إذا اليوم حاسين حالنا lonely. أوكي، فسرتينا إذا chronic ولا لا، وإذا chronic let's seek help. بعتقد this is the way to go. بس إذا بعد ما وصلنا على chronic stage, where do we start? Practical tips that we can give our audience يلي عم بيسمعونا، ونرجع نفرجي كيف ننقل على الروم.
Absolutely. So I would encourage people to start with developing self-awareness, meaning يجربوا يسألوا حالهم شو هو السبب تبع اللونلينس اللي أنا عم بشعر فيه. So مثل اليوم حكينا عن الأنواع تبع اللونلينس. Could it be a lack of physical connection? Could it be a lack of emotional intimacy? شو ما كانت الأنواع، يمكن تكون combination. I think it's important for us to be reflective. So I would encourage the audience اللي عم يسمعونا اليوم to ask themselves, what is the type that I struggle with, or types? What could be the cause of it? Did it start recently? Did it start in the past, but it's getting kind of worse now? Did something happen more recently for me to feel this feeling more? And then, like I said, acknowledgement. We want to understand it's okay to feel lonely. Let's not judge the feeling. ما بتصدق ساندرا قد ايه هيدي الجudging of feeling تمنع أشخاص إنه يحكوا عن مشاعرهم شو ما كانت تكون, not just loneliness, but we often feel like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm not meant to feel this way. I'm supposed to be strong, or I'm supposed to be happy all the time. وهيدا الشيء can be really, really an issue. So I want people to understand today that it's okay to feel lonely. It's okay to feel sad sometimes. These things are normal. We can't be happy-go-lucky, rainbows and butterflies all the time. You know, we're human beings. We're built this way. We come with a range of experience, a range of emotional experiences, and that's okay. You know, تاني شغلة, after you've been able to identify وتعرفوا شو هو الcause, etc., then we can think about which approach to take. You know, so for someone who recognizes, oh, my loneliness is because I have social anxiety, you know, then we know, okay, the area to work on is trying to minimize that fear, work on social skills, etc. So I think بيختلف الapproach حسب كل شخص شو هو loneliness تبعه, if that makes sense. And again, دايما بنهب ب you're not alone in whatever suffering you are going through. Please know that we're here to help. We might not always have the right answers, but we want to sit with you in that discomfort and listen to you if that's the least we can do. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Sandra.
أنا رح فرجي how we're gonna move to the room. So يلي كل عم بيسمعونا يلي معودين علينا already بيعرفوا على الاب بيبين عندهم بالمنيو بيبين عندهم كلمة rooms. They press on it and then they will find a room that we just created. It's a virtual safe space. So رح نفوت عليه كلنا. ما منسجل بقلب الروم. فيكم ترفعوا ايدكم في كبسة قدامكم to raise hand تقدروا تحكوا تطلعوا live, and you can also listen to others and you can also ask your questions anonymously. فكيف ما بترتاحوا نحن هون مثل ما قالت دكتور نيكول, we are here, we are serious to listen and to try and help in any way possible. So please don't go away and meet us in the room تنكفي discussion. Dr. Nicole, أنا رح وقف اللايف and I'll see you in the room.